There is a sound you never forget. The sound of your own daughter-in-law's hand striking your face inside the house you paid for. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was sharp, clean, and final. For a moment, the entire room went silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. I remember the sunlight that afternoon. It came through the kitchen window in thin gold lines stretching across the hardwood floors I refinished myself 10 years ago. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, safe. And then she slapped me. My cheek burned, not from pain, from disbelief. I did not raise my hand. I did not shout. I did not step back. I simply stood there and looked at her. My daughter-in-law, the woman I welcomed into my home, the woman I let stay here when their apartment lease fell through, the woman I defended when relatives said she had a temper. She stood in front of me, breathing heavily, her purse hanging from one shoulder. Her eyes were not ashamed. They were angry, entitled. "You think you can control everything," she said. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from rage. Across the room, my son stood near the doorway. He did not move. He did not speak. He did not rush to me. He just watched. And that silence cut deeper than the slap ever could. I slowly placed the dish towel down on the counter, very carefully, very calmly, because I knew something she did not. When people lose control, they show you exactly who they are. And when they show you who they are, you believe them. "I asked for the keys," she said again. Keys, as if that was all this was about. Metal and locks, as if this house was simply a building, not the place where I nursed my husband through his final days, not the place I nearly lost before I worked double shifts to keep it, not the place I rebuilt with my own hands when the roof leaked and no one offered help. "You don't need this whole house," she continued. Her words were sharp now. "You're old. You stay in one room. It makes more sense if we take over." Take over. There it was. Not a request, a takeover. My son shifted his weight. "Mom, maybe it's time," he muttered. "Maybe it's time." I looked at him. The boy I carried for 9 months, the boy who once cried because he was afraid of the dark, the boy who used to promise he would always protect me. And now he could not even protect my dignity. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not even hurt, clarity. I straightened my shoulders. "I'm not giving you anything," I said quietly. That was when her face hardened. That was when her hand lifted. And that was when she struck me. There are moments in life when everything shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. As I turned my face back toward her, I realized something important. She thought the slap would make me small. She thought humiliation would force my hand. She thought fear would make me surrender. She was wrong, because what she did not know, I had already made arrangements. I had already seen the signs. I had already protected myself. And the keys she demanded so desperately were the least important thing in this house. I looked at her, steady, unshaken, and I asked the calmest question I have ever asked in my life. "Are you finished?" She had no idea what I did next. The silence after a slap is heavier than the sound itself. She lowered her hand slowly, not because she regretted it, because she expected it to work. My cheek was still warm, but my voice was steady. "Are you finished?" I asked again. She laughed, short, sharp. "You're unbelievable," she said. Unbelievable. That word people use when you refuse to react the way they planned. My son finally stepped forward. "Mom, just give her the keys." Just. As if surrendering ownership of your home is a small adjustment, as if dignity is a drawer you can empty without consequences. I turned toward him slowly. "When did this become your house?" I asked. He avoided my eyes. "We live here now," he replied. Live. Yes, they lived here, in the guest room I painted before they arrived, using the Wi-Fi I pay for, parking in the driveway that belongs to me. Living is not the same as owning. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. Harder. People always say that when they want compliance. Not fair. Compliance. We're trying to build our future. You're holding us back. Holding them back? From what? Responsibility? Rent? Independence? She held her hand out. "Give me the house keys," she demanded. Not asked, demanded. As if authority could be seized with volume. I reached into my pocket slowly. Her eyes followed my hand. So did my son's. For a brief second, I saw relief flicker across his face. He thought this was over. He thought I would give in. I pulled the keys out. The metal glinted in the kitchen light. I held them in my palm. "You want these?" I asked calmly. "Yes," she snapped. She reached for them. I didn't let go. Not yet. "Tell me something first," I said quietly. She rolled her eyes. "What?" "When did you decide this house was yours?" She exhaled sharply. "We've talked about this," she said. No, they had talked about it. Behind closed doors, late at night, in whispers they thought I couldn't hear. The walls in old houses are thin, and I listen. "You're alone," she continued. "It makes sense for us to take over." Alone. There it was. Not concerned. Opportunity. My son cleared his throat. "We can put you in a smaller place," he said carefully. A smaller place. Like downsizing a storage unit, not a life. I looked at him fully now. "And where would I go?" I asked. He hesitated. "We'd find something comfortable." Comfortable. Comfortable for whom? She stepped in again. "You don't need 5 bedrooms," she said. "We're starting a family." Starting a family, as if I hadn't already built one. I let go of the keys, not into her hand, onto the counter. The metal clinked sharply. The sound made her flinch. "Take them," I said. She grabbed them immediately. Victory flashed across her face. My son exhaled. He thought this was a resolution. He thought I had surrendered. But giving someone access is not the same as giving them power. She walked toward the front door. She tested the key in the lock. I turned it, smiled. "It fits," she said. Of course it did. It always had. But what she did not know was this. That was the old lock, the one I was planning to replace. Because 2 weeks ago I noticed something. Documents left on the dining table, printed, highlighted, property transfer options, co-ownership structure, early asset consolidation. I said nothing then. I simply made a phone call, then another, then another. I had been quiet for years, but quiet does not mean unaware. As she jingled the keys proudly, I reached for my phone. "What are you doing?" my son asked. "Finishing something," I replied. I dialed a number I had saved under a simple name, Security. The line picked up immediately. "Yes, Mrs. Carter?" "Yes," I said calmly. "It's time." She frowned. "Time for what?" she demanded. I looked at her, really looked at her. "You wanted control," I said softly. "You just didn't understand what comes with it." Her smile faded slightly. My son's posture shifted. "What did you do?" he asked. I didn't answer. Not yet, because some lessons require timing, and timing is everything. She thought the slap made her powerful. She thought the keys meant ownership. She thought humiliation meant leverage. She had no idea. She had just activated something I set in motion weeks ago. And this house? It was never as simple as a key. That was the demand. And the consequences were already on their way. The mistake she made was thinking the slap started the story. It didn't. It only exposed how far she had already decided to go. 2 weeks before that afternoon in the kitchen, I found the first sign. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no confrontation. Just a folder left slightly open on the dining table. Highlighted sections, sticky notes, joint ownership transfer, primary residence consolidation, equity realignment. Language that sounds professional, clean, harmless. Until you read it slowly. My name appeared in the margins, circled, underlined, next to the phrase, "Voluntary transfer recommended." Voluntary, as if pressure can be labeled as generosity. I closed the folder exactly as I found it, and I said nothing. Because when people believe you are unaware, they speak freely. That night, I listened. They thought I was asleep. Their voices drifted down the hallway. "She won't fight it," my daughter-in-law whispered. "She hates conflict." My son sighed. "It's just easier if she signs." Easier. For whom? I didn't interrupt. I didn't confront. I made tea, and I made calls. The first call was to my attorney. Not emotional, not urgent, measured. "I want to review the title structure on the house," I said calmly. There was a pause on the other end. "Has something happened?" "Not yet," I replied. We reviewed the deed, the trust, the clauses most people forget exist, contingency triggers, occupancy protections. I had signed years ago without ever imagining I would need it. The house was not just mine. It was layered, structured, protected. My late husband had insisted on that. He used to say, "Ownership without insulation is exposure." I remembered that. My son never learned it. The second call I made was to the property management firm, discreet, professional. I requested an updated security protocol, new lock system, biometric override, remote access control, scheduled installation for the following week. They asked if there was a concern. "No," I said, "just precaution." Precaution always sounds calmer than preparation. The third call was quieter, to the bank, not about money, about access. I adjusted authorization levels, removed informal permissions, restricted visibility on linked accounts. No drama, just clarity, because access is power, and I could feel them reaching for it. The arrangement was not revenge, it was stabilized. When people begin planning your removal from your own life, you do not argue, you fortify. 3 days before the slap, she tested me, casually. "Have you ever thought about downsizing?" she asked while scrolling through her phone. I looked at her over my glasses. "Have you ever thought about independence?" I replied gently. She smiled tightly, not amused. She believed time was on her side. She believed age was mine. She believed patience meant weakness. The new lock system was installed the morning before the incident. They were both out. Work, errands, planning. The technician walked me through the controls. Facial recognition access. Primary administrator, me. Secondary users, none. Temporary codes expire automatically. Old keys become decorative. I held the new key card in my hand, thin, unremarkable. Power rarely looks impressive. I placed the old metal keys back on the hook near the kitchen, let them hang there, waiting. The arrangement was complete before she ever lifted her hand, which is why, when she slapped me and demanded the keys, I did not panic, I did not shout, I did not cry, because she was asking for something that was already obsolete. Back in the present, as she stood by the door, proudly turning the old key in the lock, she felt control settle into her shoulders. "It fits," she said again. Yes, it fit the old mechanism, the one scheduled for deactivation. My phone buzzed gently. Installation confirmed. System live. She turned the knob and opened the door, stepped outside, turned back. "See," she said, "nothing complicated." Nothing complicated. I watched her re-enter the house. I watched her try the key again. Turn, click, lock, unlock. She felt victorious because she did not understand layers. My son looked uneasy now. "What's going on?" he asked. "Nothing," I replied calmly. "Everything." There is a difference between ownership and access. Access can be handed over. Ownership must be structured. They thought they were accelerating my exit. What they were actually doing was triggering a clause, because part of the trust agreement included something simple. Any documented attempt to coerce transfer of the primary residence automatically activates review and protective measures. My attorney had drafted that after my husband passed. At the time, it felt excessive. Now, it felt prophetic. Security would arrive within the hour, not to remove them, not yet, just to verify occupancy compliance. The house was legally classified as owner-occupied primary residence only. Extended stay by non-owners beyond a certain duration required written authorization. Authorization they did not have. The arrangement had nothing to do with pride. It had everything to do with foresight. She slapped me expecting a reaction. She demanded keys expecting surrender. What she did not expect was that the foundation beneath her confidence had already shifted. When the doorbell rang 40 minutes later, she frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked sharply. "Yes," I replied. She walked toward the door confidently. I opened it. 2 uniformed property officers stood calmly outside, professional, neutral. "Good afternoon," one of them said. "We're here regarding a compliance review." Her posture stiffened. "Compliance for what?" she demanded. I stood slowly from the kitchen chair. "For the house," I answered. My son's face drained slightly, because at that moment he realized something. This was not emotional, this was structural. The slap had been impulsive, the arrangement had been strategic. She thought the demand gave her leverage. She had no idea. She had just accelerated the review process I quietly prepared for. And once the structure moves, emotion no longer matters. The arrangement was never about punishment, it was about protection, and protection, once activated, does not ask permission. The officers did not raise their voices, they did not threaten, they did not accuse, they simply stepped inside, and calm authority is far more unsettling than anger. My daughter-in-law tried to block the doorway at first. "There must be some mistake," she said sharply. "There isn't. the older officer replied. He held a tablet in his hand. My name was on the screen. Primary occupant, primary authority. No secondary residency authorization on file. He glanced at her politely. Ma'am, how long have you been residing here? The word residing hit differently than visiting. She hesitated. We're family, she said. That wasn't the question, he answered evenly. My son stepped forward then. We've been staying here temporarily, he said, his voice quieter than usual. How long is temporary? The officer asked. Because temporary had quietly become permanent. Boxes in the guest room, clothes in the master closet, mail arriving in both their names. They hadn't asked, they had assumed. The officer turned slightly toward me. Do you authorize extended residency for both parties? He asked. Authorize. The power of that word settled over the room like weight. I could feel my daughter-in-law's eyes burning into me. This was the moment she believed I would fold, because family pressures you to keep peace, because mothers sacrifice, because older women soften. But protection does not require cruelty. It requires clarity. No, I said calmly. The silence after that was louder than the slap. My son inhaled sharply. Mom, he started, but he didn't finish. The officer nodded once. Under the terms of the property agreement, non-authorized occupants must vacate within 72 hours, he stated. 72 hours. Structured, measured, not emotional. My daughter-in-law's composure fractured first. This is ridiculous, she snapped. We live here. You stay here, the officer corrected gently. She turned to my son. Say something. He looked at me, then at the officers, then on the floor, because at that moment he understood something he hadn't before. The house was not negotiable. It was protected. I didn't know it was structured like this, he admitted quietly. That's because you never asked, I replied. The officers continued explaining the formalities. A written notice would be delivered, security access would be updated, unauthorized access attempts would trigger a report. Professional, routine, efficient. The humiliation was not loud. It was procedural. After they left, the house felt different, not tense, defined. My daughter-in-law rounded on me immediately. You set this up, she accused. Yes, I answered. Her jaw tightened. You're pushing us out. No, I corrected calmly. I'm refusing to be pushed. There is a difference. She looked at the old keys still in her hand. Suddenly they felt useless because the locks had already changed, the authority had already shifted, the access she thought she secured had already expired. My son walked to the kitchen slowly. You could have talked to us, he said quietly. I tried, I replied. You called it resistance. He had no answer for that, because resistance sounds unreasonable, protection sounds justified. He just never recognized which one I was offering. That evening, the tension thickened. Boxes were opened, drawers emptied, whispers replaced conversations. She moved sharply through the house, like someone trying to reclaim ground that was already gone. You're destroying your relationship with your son, she said coldly as she packed. I didn't react, because relationships built on access are fragile. Relationships built on respect survive boundaries. I reminded you you slapped me. She froze for a second, as if the physical act had already faded from her memory. It was emotional, she said defensively. It was revealing, I replied. My son stood between us then, not physically, emotionally, conflicted, because for the first time he was watching structure overpower emotion. He had grown up believing this house was simply home. He didn't realize it was also architecture, legal architecture, financial insulation, strategic foresight. By the second day, the strain began to show. They had nowhere immediately ready. Their assumption had been simple: push me out, take control, rearrange ownership later. They never considered the possibility that I would hold the line. On the third day, my son came to sit across from me, the same kitchen table where the slap happened. "You don't trust us," he said quietly. "I don't trust coercion," I replied. He looked exhausted. "She thought you'd cave," he admitted quietly. "And you?" I asked. He hesitated. "I thought you'd compromise." Compromise, another word that often means surrender slowly. "I already compromised," I said, "for years." He stared at his hands, because compromise without recognition becomes erasure. By the end of the 72 hours, their suitcases were by the door. No screaming, no dramatic goodbye, just tension thick enough to taste. My daughter-in-law paused before stepping outside. "You'll regret this," she said flatly. "No, I'll remember it." Memory is different from regret. The door closed behind them. The biometric system clicked softly as it secured. Quiet. Final. I stood in the center of the living room and exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. The consequence was not eviction. It was clear. They believed they could escalate control through force. Instead, they triggered boundaries that were already waiting. My phone buzzed shortly after. A message from my attorney. Protective review initiated. Documentation secured. Documentation. Evidence. Record. Because the slap had been captured, not by a hidden camera, but the officer's body cam during the compliance review when she repeated her admission in anger. "Fine, I shouldn't have slapped you." Sometimes people confess in frustration, and frustration becomes record. The consequence was not revenge. It was insulation tightening. They left believing I had overreacted. They did not understand what they had actually done. They had activated a permanent shift. Access revoked, residency terminated, trust fractured. And something else. My son had seen something that day. Not a weakness, not stubbornness, strength that did not raise its voice. The house was quiet that night, but it did not feel empty. It felt intact. The slap was loud. The consequence was silent. And silence, when structured correctly, lasts longer than anger ever could. The house was quiet, but silence after confrontation is never empty. It listens. The first aftershock didn't come from my son. It came from the outside. 3 days after they left, my phone started vibrating more than usual. Not calls, messages. "Is everything okay? I heard something happened." "She's telling people you forced them out." That was when I understood. When people lose control privately, they try to regain it publicly. My daughter-in-law had started talking, not about the slap, not about the demand for my keys, about how I was unstable, about how I was overreacting, about how I was isolating her son. Narrative is a weapon when facts are inconvenient. I didn't respond immediately because panic feeds rumors. Calm dissolves them. Later that afternoon, my son called. His voice was different, tighter. "She feels humiliated," he said. "Humiliation follows behavior," I replied. "She says you planned everything." "I did," I said calmly. There was a long pause. "You're not denying it?" "No." Because planning is not manipulation. Planning is protection. He exhaled slowly. "People think this is extreme. People don't know what happened," I said. Silence. He hadn't told them. Of course he hadn't. Admitting that your wife slapped your mother complicates the story. So the story became simpler. I was cold, rigid, unyielding. It is easier to criticize a boundary than to admit why it exists. The second aftershock came from the bank, an automatic alert triggered after the residency status changed, a routine verification call. "Have there been any unauthorized access attempts?" the representative asked. "Yes," I said, because there had been. My daughter-in-law had tried her old access code twice the night after they left. Twice. The system recorded it, time-stamped, documented. Aftershock number 3 came quietly. A lawyer's letter. Not aggressive, not threatening. A mediation request. She wanted discussion regarding fair occupancy rights. Occupancy rights? The entitlement had evolved into paperwork. I forwarded the letter to my attorney without comment. Her response came back within an hour. No tenancy agreement, no financial contribution, no legal standing. Structured, solid, immovable. I did not need to fight. I needed to remain consistent. The real aftershock, though, was emotional. My son stopped visiting. Not completely, just enough to signal distance. Distance hurts more than shouting. He called less frequently, texted instead of coming by. His loyalty was stretched thin between wife and mother, and tension makes people retreat. One evening, he finally came over, alone. He stood in the doorway like a guest, not like a son. "Can we talk?" he asked. "We always could," I replied. He sat at the same table where everything began. "She thinks you don't respect her," he said. "She slapped me," I answered calmly. He nodded slowly. "She says she was provoked." "By what?" I asked. Silence. He didn't have an answer, because asking for keys is one thing, demanding them is another. Striking someone while doing it changes everything. He rubbed his forehead. "This is tearing everything apart," he said. "No," I corrected gently. "It's revealing everything." Aftershocks don't destroy structures. They test foundations. If something collapses, it wasn't stable to begin with. He looked around the house. It hadn't changed. Same walls, same furniture, same quiet authority. "You're not scared of losing me?" he asked suddenly. There it was, the real question. "I'm scared of losing your respect, not your proximity." That landed, because proximity without respect is hollow. He left that night with more questions than answers, but something shifted. He was no longer defending her automatically. He was thinking. The final aftershock came unexpectedly. A mutual acquaintance called me privately. "She's telling people you're trying to push them into financial instability," she said. Financial instability? That word again, as if housing access equals economic survival. I replied calmly, "She has a job. So does he." Silence on the other end. People often assume older women are dependent, fragile, easily manipulated. They rarely consider that older women understand systems better than anyone. By the end of that week, the noise began to fade, because narratives without escalation burn out. I never responded publicly, never countered accusations, never defended myself online or in whispers. I simply stayed consistent, and consistency erodes exaggeration. My son called again one night. "I saw the access attempt logs," he admitted quietly. He had asked for them. He hadn't told her. "She told me she didn't try," he he continued. Silence. Then realization. Aftershock. Not loud, internal. When someone lies about small things, I said carefully, pay attention. He didn't answer, but I could hear something cracking. Trust is rarely destroyed in one moment. It fractures in waves. The slap was the earthquake. The lies were the aftershocks. By the end of the month, something unexpected happened. He asked if we could meet for coffee. Neutral ground, public space. No house, no keys, no tension in walls. Just conversation. As we sat across from each other, he looked older, more measured. I didn't realize how fast she escalated, he admitted. Escalation always starts small. Demand, pressure, physical boundary crossed. Then the narrative shifts, then blame. He stirred his coffee slowly. I think I was avoiding the pattern, he said. Avoidance is comfortable until it isn't. The aftershock had done its job. It exposed what the initial event could not just disrespect, but strategy. And strategy without consent becomes coercion. When we stood to leave, he didn't hug me tightly. He didn't promise anything, but he said something simple. I'm thinking. That was enough, because thinking interrupts manipulation. The house remains quiet now, not tense, not waiting, just steady. Aftershocks do not destroy stable structures. They remove weak attachments. And sometimes the loudest event in a story is not the slap. It's what happens after the noise fades. Shifts do not announce themselves. They happen in posture, in tone, in the space between words. The first shift was small. My son stopped defending her automatically, not publicly, not dramatically, but in conversation. When she said I was controlling, he asked, how? When she said I was trying to divide them, he asked, from what? Questions change momentum. Questions slow manipulation. She didn't like the questions, that was obvious, because certainty depends on no one examining it too closely. The second shift came through silence. She stopped mentioning the house entirely. No more comments about future plans, no more casual references to eventually moving in, no more assumptions disguised as jokes. When a goal becomes unreachable, people stop naming it. The third shift came financially. He separated their discretionary accounts, not dramatically, not as punishment, as a precaution. I need visibility, he told her. Visibility, transparency, two things she had resisted before. The house key incident had created a crack. The attempted access log had widened it. Now the pattern was under inspection, and inspection changes behavior. One evening he came over again, not hesitant this time, measured. He asked her why she needed my keys, he said. And? I asked. She said it was about practicality. And the slap? He exhaled. She said she felt disrespected. By what? I asked again. He looked down. She couldn't explain it clearly. Disrespect is often claimed when entitlement is denied. He leaned back in his chair. He replayed it in my head, he said quietly. You didn't raise your voice. No. You didn't threaten her. No. You just said no. Yes. Silence. There it was, the shift. He was no longer analyzing me, he was analyzing her. That's when balance begins to return. At home, tension between them escalated, not explosive, sharp. She accused him of choosing sides. He responded differently now. I'm choosing facts, he told her. Facts feel cold to people who rely on emotion. The fourth shift came socially. A friend of his mentioned hearing multiple versions of the story. Versions, plural. That detail mattered. When someone changes the narrative depending on the audience, consistency disappears. He started noticing inconsistencies, dates shifting, details changing, intensity exaggerated. When truth is stable, it does not need adjustment. One night he called late, not stressed, clear. He asked her directly if she tried the code twice. He said, "And?" I asked. She said it must have been an accident. Twice. Accidents rarely repeat with precision. He paused. I asked her why she didn't tell me that sooner. Silence on his end. She said she didn't think it mattered, but it did, because it proved intent, and intent reveals character. The biggest shift came internally. He stopped trying to repair the surface, stopped pushing for family dinners, stopped suggesting moving past it. He began asking a harder question. What does respect actually look like? Respect looks like restraint. Respect looks like accountability. Respect never looks like entitlement paired with force. He started reading, quietly, about conflict patterns, about escalation, about manipulation through emotional inversion. He didn't tell her he was reading, he just listened more carefully. Patterns repeat when unchallenged, they weaken under observation. One afternoon he arrived unexpectedly, not upset this time, grounded. "I was afraid to admit she crossed a line," he said. "Why?" I asked. "Because if she crossed that line, I have to decide what that means. And decisions change futures." He wasn't there yet, but he was no longer in denial. That's the shift. Not separation, not reconciliation. Awareness. When awareness arrives, manipulation loses oxygen. The house feels steady again. Not because the conflict vanished, because the power imbalance was corrected. He no longer sees me as an obstacle. He sees me as stable ground. And stable ground does not chase. It waits. The shift is subtle, but permanent. Loyalty is no longer blind. It is informed. And informed loyalty does not tolerate force. Reckoning does not begin with shouting. It begins with stillness, the kind that follows clarity. He didn't rush the decision. That surprised her. She expected drama, ultimatums, a loud confrontation she could counter with louder emotion. Instead, he became quiet, measured, observant. And quiet is harder to fight than anger. For 2 weeks, he stayed in the rental, not to punish her, to think. Distance removes distortion. Without daily tension, patterns become visible. He started writing things down, dates, conversations, moments he dismissed before, the slap, the keys, the access attempts, the shifting explanations. When events are written plainly, without emotion, they look different, less chaotic, more deliberate. He asked her to meet, neutral space, no house, no audience, just the two of them. She arrived prepared for battle. He arrived prepared for truth. "I need you to explain something clearly," he said. Her posture tightened. "What?" "Why did you feel entitled to her house?" She blinked. "It's not about entitlement, it's about family." "Family doesn't demand keys," he said calmly. Silence. "You embarrassed me," She shot back. How? In front of her. You didn't back me. He nodded slowly. So this is about control. No, she snapped. It's about respect. Respect again. He didn't argue. He asked one more question. If this had been reversed, if I had slapped your mother and demanded her keys, what would you call it? Her face changed, because when behavior is mirrored, clarity sharpens. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He stood, not angrily, calmly. I can't move forward pretending that it was small. Are you leaving? She asked. I'm choosing boundaries. Boundaries. The word she once called controlling, now it was his. The reckoning did not explode outward, it collapsed inward. Back at the house, he came to see me, not as a mediator, as a son. I should have stopped it the second it happened. Yes, I replied gently. I didn't want to believe she could cross that line. Belief protects love. Reality protects dignity. He nodded. I don't know what will happen next. You don't have to. You just have to decide what you tolerate. That is the core of reckoning. Not punishment, not revenge, tolerance. He went back to the rental that night. She called him repeatedly, messages layered in urgency, apology, blame, fear, anger, love, every emotion used as leverage. He responded once, I need accountability, not intensity. No reply came after that. Days passed. Then something shifted publicly. She posted a vague message online about betrayal, about manipulation, about mothers who can't let go. People commented, speculated. I supported her. He did not respond. Silence again. But this time, it was strength. Reckoning is when someone realizes their behavior no longer controls the outcome. She came to the house once, didn't knock, didn't shout, just stood outside for a moment. Then I left. No confrontation, because confrontation requires power, and she felt it slipping. The final conversation happened 3 weeks later. No raised voices, no theatrics. I was angry, she admitted. That explains emotion, not entitlement. She swallowed. I thought if I pushed, you'd choose me. And now? He asked. I don't know. Neither did he, but he knew one thing clearly. Love without respect collapses. He told her he needed separation, not to punish, to reset. If she wanted to rebuild, it would require ownership, real ownership, not narrative shifts, not excuses, ownership of behavior, ownership of harm, ownership of intent. She didn't fight this time because she understood. The reckoning wasn't about the slap anymore. It was about patterns, and patterns, once exposed, cannot be unseen. He came home after that, sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the keys once lay untouched. I thought marriage meant defending your partner no matter what. It means holding them accountable, too, I replied gently. He nodded slowly. The reckoning wasn't dramatic. It was decisive. He stopped defending the indefensible. He stopped minimizing what happened. He stopped absorbing behavior to keep peace. And peace built on tolerance of disrespect is fragile. The house is quiet again. Not tense, not guarded, just steady. Reckoning does not always end relationships. Sometimes it resets them. Sometimes it ends them, but it always ends in an illusion. She slapped me. She demanded my keys. She thought she was asserting control. What she did instead was revealed exactly who she was, and that revelation shifted everything. Rebuilding does not begin with forgiveness, it begins with distance, not punishment, space. After the reckoning, there were no dramatic announcements, no public explanations, no emotional speeches. There was simply a pause. He extended the rental agreement, not angrily, not impulsively, deliberately. Space allows clarity to breathe. Without daily friction, without defensive conversations, without constant emotional negotiation, reality settles. For the first time in months, he wasn't reacting, he was thinking. She reached out several times, short messages at first. "I miss you. We need to talk. I was overwhelmed." Then longer ones, explanations layered with emotion, justifications wrapped in vulnerability. But something had shifted. He read them without urgency, without guilt, without the reflex to fix. Because rebuilding requires a different mindset than survival. Survival reacts, rebuilding evaluates. At home, the house felt different too, not because anything changed physically, because something had stabilized. The keys remained where they always had been, untouched, unquestioned. The security code was updated, not out of fear, out of protocol. That distinction matters. He began therapy quietly. He didn't announce it. He didn't frame it as dramatic. He simply scheduled it. Because if you want to rebuild something stable, you examine the foundation. Why did he hesitate that night? Why did he freeze? Why did he try to soften what was clear? These were not accusations. They were reflections. Rebuilding starts with asking yourself hard questions before asking them of others. She agreed to counseling too, at least at first. The first joint session was restrained, careful words, measured tone. She framed the slap as emotional overload, as stress. For a moment, the therapist asked something simple. Was it the first time you felt entitled to control a situation? Silence. Rebuilding requires honesty, not narrative. Honesty, and honesty is uncomfortable. He didn't attack her, he didn't defend me, he simply described what he felt in that moment. Shock, disappointment, embarrassment, and something else. Clarity. She struggled with that word, because clarity removes room for reinterpretation. In the following weeks, patterns surfaced, small ones, interrupting conversations, framing requests as expectations, using emotional intensity to steer outcomes, not evil, but consistent. Rebuilding meant addressing patterns, not incidents. At the house, I stayed steady. I did not interfere. I did not advise unless asked, because rebuilding their marriage was not my role. Protecting my boundary was, and that boundary remained firm. No spare key, no open access, no code sharing, no symbolic gestures to smooth discomfort. Stability first, comfort later. He visited often, not to report, to decompress. One evening he said something quietly. I didn't realize how much I avoided conflict to keep things smooth. I replied, smoothing over cracks doesn't repair them. He nodded. Rebuilding required him to tolerate discomfort, to say no without apology, to pause instead of placate. She noticed the difference. He stopped reacting to emotional escalation, stopped defending every boundary, stopped trying to mediate between her feelings and my property. He simply held his position, and positions that are held calmly become anchors. There were setbacks, arguments resurfaced, old habits tried to reclaim space. She accused him once of choosing his mother over his wife. He responded differently this time. He said, I'm choosing respect. That changed the tone immediately, because rebuilding is not about sides, it is about standards. Gradually, intensity reduced, not dramatically, incrementally. She apologized, not in a long speech, not in performance, just once, directly. I crossed a line. That mattered, not because it erased what happened, because it acknowledged it without dilution. Rebuilding only works when ownership replaces defensiveness. Time passed, weeks became months. The rental became temporary instead of symbolic. He didn't rush to move back. He evaluated, not the house, the relationship. When he finally returned, it was not triumphant. I was cautious, measured, boundaries discussed clearly, access defined, expectations spoken out loud instead of assumed, and something surprising happened. The tension that once hovered began dissolving, because control had been replaced with structure. The structure is not cold, it is safe. The house remained mine, the keys remained with me, and yet the atmosphere felt lighter, because rebuilding is not about returning to what was, it is about constructing something that does not require silence to survive. He told me one evening, "I understand now that protecting you doesn't weaken my marriage." "No," I replied, "it strengthens your character." Rebuilding revealed something deeper. The slap had not destroyed everything, but it exposed what needed correction: respect, authority, identity. When those were restored, the environment changed. Not perfect, stable, and stability is the quiet goal most people overlook. She became softer in tone, less reactive, more reflective. Not because she lost, because she adjusted. Rebuilding is not dramatic. It is repetitive, consistent behavior over time. Boundaries are maintained even when things feel better. No shortcuts, no emotional bargains. And that consistency built something stronger than before. Not dominance, not fear, respect. The house feels steady again, not guarded, not tense, just grounded. Rebuilding did not mean forgetting, it meant learning. And when learning replaces ego, growth becomes possible. The lesson did not arrive all at once, it settled slowly, like dust after something heavy has been dropped. No one talks about what happens after boundaries are restored. They talk about confrontation, about consequences, about dramatic turning points. But the real lesson lives in what remains, and what remains is pattern. Weeks after everything stabilized, I found myself standing in the kitchen one morning, looking at the same key hook on the wall. The keys were still there, exactly where they belonged. That mattered more than the apology, more than the counseling, more than the reconciliation. Because the real lesson was not about the slap, it was about entitlement. Entitlement rarely begins with violence. It begins with assumption. Assuming access, assuming control, assuming authority without earning it. When she demanded my house keys, she wasn't just asking for metal, she was testing hierarchy. And that is the lesson. The moment someone demands what is yours without conversation, they are revealing how they see you, not as an equal, as an obstacle. That night taught my son something deeper than loyalty. It taught him discernment. He learned that love without respect becomes pressure, that marriage without boundaries becomes negotiation, that silence in the face of wrongdoing becomes permission. And he learned something about me, too, that calm is not weakness, that restraint is not fear, that steadiness is not passivity. For years I had moved quietly, handled things gently, spoken carefully. He mistook that for softness. She mistook that for access. The slap corrected that illusion, not because I retaliated, because I refused to collapse. That is the lesson. When someone disrespects you, your reaction teaches them how to treat you next. If you explode, they manage your emotions. If you shrink, they manage your space. If you stay steady, they must confront themselves. I stayed steady, not because I wasn't hurt, but because hurt does not require chaos to be valid. She eventually understood something too. Apology without change is performance. Change without consistency is temporary. Respect requires repetition, and repetition builds trust. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly, not for me, for herself. She had to confront why control felt necessary, why pressure felt effective, why intensity replaced dialogue. Those answers were not comfortable, but comfort does not build character. Awareness does. My son changed the most. He stopped confusing peace with avoidance. He stopped smoothing tension just to move forward. He learned that protecting your parents does not weaken your marriage, and protecting your marriage does not require sacrificing your integrity. That balance is adulthood. The house remained mine, the keys remained mine, but something more important shifted: the dynamic. There was no longer an unspoken hierarchy hovering in the background, no quiet testing, no subtle pushing. Boundaries once drawn and enforced reshape the room permanently. That is the quiet power people underestimate. You do not have to shout to reset the tone. You do not have to be punished to create corrections. You only have to be immovable where it matters. The lesson is simple. Access is a privilege. Respect is a requirement. And silence should never be mistaken for surrender. If someone ever crosses a line in your life, remember this: your calm response is not weakness. Your refusal to engage in chaos is not fear. And your boundaries are not cruel. They are clarity. The night she slapped me did not destroy my family. It exposed it. And exposure, when handled correctly, becomes education. Education becomes structure. Structure becomes stability. And stability is stronger than dominance. She thought intensity would force compliance. It forced consequence instead. He thought mediation would solve everything. It revealed what he had avoided. And I learned something too. Even when you believe you are respected, you must still protect your ground. Not aggressively, not defensively, confidently. Today, when I look at that key hook on the wall, I don't see conflict. I see confirmation. Confirmation that staying steady works, that clarity lasts, that quiet strength travels farther than reaction ever will. If you are listening to this and someone has ever tried to take something from you through pressure, through intimidation, through emotion, remember, you do not have to fight loudly. You do not have to argue endlessly. You do not have to collapse to keep peace. Sometimes the strongest move is simply standing still, letting the truth reveal itself, and allowing others to adjust around your boundaries. That is the lesson. Not revenge, not humiliation, clarity. And clarity, once established, does not need to defend itself again.